Good afternoon, everybody, and thank you for joining us. This is the part two of the Florida Legislative Review, which covers the bill that have been passed by the legislature and it's presented by the Building Officials Association of Florida. My name is Ron Leseca. I am the chair of the Legislative Committee, along with Sergio Escunce and Stephanie Rossi, our vice chairs. We'll be doing the presentation today. If you have any questions, let me go the housekeeping items. Of course, we're presenting this information based on our review, and it's our best data. However, we strongly encourage you to get a copy of the adopted or enrolled bill for full details and related information. Some of these bills are rather lengthy and have a lot of parts. The webinar session has been submitted to ICC for educational credit. And if you have filled out all your information, including your license number, etc., it will be submitted to ICC, and you will then get the educational credit, which should be then recorded on your BOAF information. This session is being recorded, and in a few days, it will be posted on the BOAF website in case you want to review it or you have somebody in your office that couldn't make it but wants to go over the items that we have presented. If you have any questions, we ask that you submit them through the Q&A portion of the taskbar on the bottom, as we will be addressing these at the end of the session after the three segments. And with that, first up is Sergio Escunce, our vice chair. So Sergio, go away. Go take it.
Thank you, Ron. Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining this informative webinar on recent legislative bills that have passed. The first bill that's up is Senate Bill 812, and this is titled Expedited Approval of Residential Building Permits. This bill has been signed by the governor on May 29th, 2024, and it did become effective on the same date that it was signed, May 29th. In essence, this bill focuses on requiring governing bodies to create a program for issuing residential building permits before a final plat has been recorded. I do wanna say that this bill became a concern when it was originally thought to be expanding the scope of private providers to perform reviews of preliminary plats. It was through the BOAF Legislative Day that can be credited with helping to clarify its interpretation. Legislative members that day were present at the Community Affairs Committee hearing and did offer testimony on how the bill was being looked at. Even an impromptu walk with the senator between meetings helped to provide additional feedback to him. Now, it appears that between the testimony and that walk, the message was received and eventually the bill language was modified to what it eventually became. In section 1, this is a new section that's titled Expedited Approval of Residential Building Permits before a final plat is recorded. It did create some definitions specific for this section, and it requires that by October 1st, 2024, a governing body of a county that has 75,000 residents or more, and any governing body of a municipality that has 10,000 residents or more and 25 acres or more in contiguous land must create a program to expedite the process of issuing building permits for residential subdivisions or planned communities before the final plat is recorded. This is not to exceed 50% of the residential subdivisions or the planned community. So this is the program that must be created. You must institute a way that a developer can request a certain number of permits to be issued after the preliminary plat has been approved and prior to final plat. In the next section, the governing body is not restricted from issuing more than 50% of the building permits for the residential subdivision or planned community. So if the local government wants to issue more than the 50%, that's fine. The requirement for an expedited program does not apply to a county that is subject to state statute 380.0552. And that statute is titled Florida Keys Area Protection Act. So if you're bound by that Protection Act, you're not required to expedite and comply with this statute. That's an exemption. In the next section, the governing body that had a program prior to July 1st, 2023, need only update the program to accept applications for building permits up to the 50%. So if you have a program in place, but the percentage is lower than this 50% threshold, then the only thing you need to do is just bring it up to the 50% allowance. However, by December 31st of 2027, the governing body of a county that again has more than 75,000 residents, and any governing body of a municipality that has more than 10,000 residents and 25 acres of contiguous land must increase it to 75% of the residential subdivision. So that's a key date, December 31st, 2027. That percentage goes up to from 50 to 75%. The governing body is not restricted from issuing more than 75% of the building permits for the residential subdivision or planned community. So in other words, if the local government wants to issue more than 75%, again, you may. And then again, the restriction or the exception is if you're within the Florida Keys Area Protection Act, you don't have to comply with that. The governing body shall create the following: a two-step application process for the adoption of a preliminary plat in order to expedite the issuance of the building permits. The application must allow an applicant to identify the percentage of planned homes or the number of building permits that the governing body must issue for the residential subdivision or planned community. A master building permit process consistent with statute 553.794 for applicant with multiple building permits. The master permit under this provision remains valid for 3 consecutive years after issuance or until the adoption of a new code, whichever is best. And I do want to add in this case that the original language had this incorrect. It didn't recognize a new code cycle. So that was one of the clarifications that we were able to get the senator to recognize. And it was then corrected in the language, and it is consistent with how the master permits do function, which is they're valid for the code cycle in effect, and they must be renewed with a new code cycle afterwards. The applicant may use a private provider pursuant to 553.791 to expedite the application process for building permits after a preliminary plat is approved. Now, this provision does not create a new requirement. It is already applicable under the current law. So we understand that private providers can perform plan reviews and inspections on any kind of permit at the will of the developer or the owner. So the use of the private provider is allowed by statute, and the language in this bill does not change that. This is the portion of the bill that was clarified as not expanding the scope of the private provider to review preliminary plats. And that was really the biggest concern, was how are private providers going to review preliminary plats? And that opened up a lot of discussion. And obviously we got that clarified with the senator. The bill does provide establishing contracts with qualified contractors to supplement staff shortages. So a governing body shall establish a registry of at least 3 qualified contractors whom the governing body may use to supplement staff for processing and expediting the review of any application for a preliminary plat or any plans related to such application. Qualified contractor is defined as an engineer, a surveyor, architect, landscape architect, or any qualified professional who is certified in urban planning or environmental management as it relates to planning review. So obviously, this opens up the ability to, for a government to have a contract in place to supplement their staff to review plating. We all know that we can supplement our staff for regular plan reviews. However, they do need to have the qualifications from BCAP. A governing body may work with appropriate agencies to issue an address and a temporary parcel identification number. Normally, this is issued by the zoning department, and it goes back to your jurisdictions and how they establish addresses. And then usually a property appraiser establishes some kind of a parcel number. The governing body may need to establish temporary identifiers for the preliminary plat phase so that permits can be issued. Now, you must keep in mind that the permit record will then need to be updated at the CO time with the final address and the final parcel number that has been issued. A governing body must issue the number or percentage of building permits requested by the applicant, provided the residential buildings are unoccupied and all the following conditions are met. So this is an exception for being able to issue these permits after preliminary plat. The governing body has approved the preliminary plat. The applicant has provided proof that a copy of the approved preliminary plat and approved plans has been submitted prior to the relevant electric, gas, water, and wastewater utilities. So in other words, the infrastructure must be there, must be planned for. And the applicant holds a valid performance bond up to 130% of the necessary improvements. And obviously the bond is there as a guarantee that the improvements will be there. The money will be there for those improvements in case of a default or non-compliance. Now, limitations for transferring ownership. The bill does address the fact that the developer may contract to sell, but may not transfer the ownership until the final plat is approved and recorded in public records. So in essence, you are allowing to issue the permits based on a preliminary plat, but it cannot be moved into until a final plat is been approved and recorded, after which you may then allow occupancy and issue the CO. The developer may not obtain a temporary or final certificate of occupancy until the final plat is approved and recorded in the records. This was also something that we clarified. The original bill language only included a final certificate of occupancy. And we know that the building code allows for a temporary, so we didn't want this to be a loophole that developers would come to the building official and say, well, it doesn't say anything about a TCO. You can issue a TCO and allow occupancy prior to a final plat. So the bill language does include temporary as well as the final CO. And the developer has vested rights if all of the followings are met. And this is important for developers, having vested rights. The developer relies in good faith on the approved preliminary plat and any amendments thereto. And the developer incurs obligations and expenses, commences construction, and it continuing in good faith with the development of the property. And then lastly, once those vested rights are established, the governing body may not make substantive changes to the preliminary plat without the developer's written consent. The developer must indemnify and hold harmless the local government from liability or damage resulting from the issuance of a building permit and a certificate of occupancy, except for infringement on developers' vested rights, of course, and that's a provision. So this kind of sums up the changes offered by the bill as it relates to the preliminary plats and the number of building permits that can be issued prior to final plat recordation. So in essence, this is the focus of this bill, is really to have allow a residential development to get their permits out early while during the platting process, and have some assurances that they're not going to be occupied prior to a final, and it provides thresholds for those percentages in it. So that's it for this bill. The next bill concerns the condominium law changes. This is really brief as it relates to the building official. Again, this is House Bill 1021, and it's titled Community Association. This bill was signed by the governor on June the 7th, 2024, and it became effective on July 1st, 2024. And in essence, this bill provides requirements and penalties for community association managers relating to conflict of interest, revises provisions relating to the milestone inspections, reporting requirements, financial reports, board meetings, and other changes relating to the condominium law. And in section 4, this changes the statute 553.899, and this is the new statute under the building code for milestone inspection. So while this bill makes extensive changes to the condominium law within Florida Statute 718, and it does contain 154 pages, these are actually outside the purview of the building department. The only section in the law that pertains to the building official is the change to the milestone inspection, consisting with the following. Previously, the milestone inspection did not apply to single family, 2-family, or 3-family dwellings with 3 or fewer habitable stories. They basically added 4 families. So now single family, 2-family, 3-family, and 4-family condominiums that are below 3 stories, the 3 stories or fewer, are exempt from the milestone inspection. And that's really it for this bill. Again, the substantial portion of this bill was related to condominiums, how they operate, how they vote, how they elect their officers. It's quite lengthy. It's actually stated that this is condominium law 3.0 in some of the news articles that have come out. So you can read it just to understand it, but the fact is that the only part that is pertaining to the building department would be the fact that now 4 family dwellings are exempt from the milestone inspection. So with that, I'll turn it over to the next bills with Stephanie.
Okay, here is Stephanie. Steph, go ahead, take it over.
Thank you, Ron. I'll be talking about Senate Bill 328 for affordable housing. It is currently a law. Signed by the governor back in May. This is a second part to a first Senate Bill 102. It was adopted in the 2023 legislative session. The Florida's Live Local Act, I'm going to call it the LLA, was a major step towards addressing the state's growing housing affordability crisis. In addition to funding the state's existing affordable housing programs and creating new ad valorem tax rebates, the landmark bill included statewide preemption of local zoning ordinances to significantly boost development capacity for qualifying mixed-income multifamily development. This landmark bill encourages the development of mixed-income projects with at least 40% of all dwelling units designated as affordable for households earning less than 120% of area median income. Okay, next slide. Okay. The bill amends, as I said, the 2023 LLA for land use and zoning provisions for affordable multifamily rental developments to preempt the local government's floor area ratio for qualifying developments, specify that a local government must reduce parking requirements by at least 20% if the development is located within half a mile of certain transportation facilities and has available parking within 600 feet. It modifies the building height entitlement to address situations where qualifying development is adjacent to single-family parcels. It prohibits qualifying developments within 1/4 mile of military installation from being approved administratively, exempts certain airport impacted areas from zoning and land use entitlements, makes clarifying changes pertaining to the density, height, and floor area ratio entitlements for qualifying developments. It clarifies that only the affordable units in a qualifying development must be rental units, and imposes special qualifiers for developments within a transit-oriented development or area. The bill makes a special provision to allow an applicant of a qualifying development who applied for the local government prior to the effective date of the bill to proceed under the applicable land use and zoning provisions of the the LLA as they existed at the time of submittal of the application. The bill also amends the ad valorem tax exemptions of the Live Local Act, established to incentivize development of multifamily rental units for individuals and families at specified household income levels. The bill clarifies administrative procedures from the exemptions, allows developments in the Florida Keys to set aside fewer rent-restricted units to qualify for the exemption in Florida Statute 196.1978, and prohibits owners from using exempt units as vacation rentals. The bill appropriates $100 million in non-recurring funds from the General Revenue Fund to the Florida Housing Finance Corporation to administer the Florida Hometown Hero Program, and makes one programmatic change. The Florida Hometown Hero Program was codified into law by the LLA to provide down payment assistance to first-time Florida homebuyers meeting certain household income thresholds. Finally, the bill clarifies the authority of the FHFC to preclude developers from participating in FHFC programs for certain violations. Okay, and that is affordable housing. Okay, the next one is House Bill 481 for building construction regulations and system warranties. The bill expands the kind of work that Class A and Class B air conditioning contractors and mechanical contractors may undertake to include replacing, disconnecting, or reconnecting power wiring on the line side of a dedicated existing electrical disconnect switch on a single-phase electrical system, and repairing or replacing power wiring, disconnects, breakers, or fuses for dedicated HVAC circuits with proper use of a circuit breaker lock. The bill prohibits the conditioning of an HVAC system warranty on product registration, and specifies that the full length of such warranties coverage term begins on the date a licensed contractor installs the system. The bill also requires that an HVAC warranty or product registration card or form must specify that the card or form is for the product registration, and that failure to complete and return the form does not diminish any warranty rights. And this went into effect on July 1st of this year.
Yep. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thanks, Steph. Okay,
You're
so I am going to now go on, and there's a couple of items that I am covering, and one of them is House Bill 293 on the hurricane protection for homeowners associations. And this bill was effective when it was signed into law, and the governor did that on May 28th. Now, what's the details on this bill? Well, they're going to protect the health, safety, and welfare of the people of the state to ensure uniformity and consistency in hurricane protection installations for the parcel owners. And it applies to all homeowner associations in the state, regardless of when the community was created. Now, the board, any architectural, construction improvement, or such similar committee and association has to adopt hurricane protection specification for each structural or other improvement on a parcel governed by the association. And these specifications may include the color and style of hurricane protection products and any other factor deemed relevant by the board. So, for example, if you have an HOA that has an architectural review board or a construction review committee, these have to go ahead and adopt written specific criteria for any of the owners to comply with. It cannot be on a case-by-case basis. There has to be something that is adopted in uniform. And of course, the specifications that are adopted by the board must comply with the applicable building code. The HOA has to adopt the standard and comply with the code requirements. The HOA cannot deny a permission of an owner to install new, replace, or enhance hurricane protection which meets the adopted standard. And the standard is focused on appearance. Remember, typically, if you have a standard and it has to comply with the code, that's going to narrow down what can be done. And at the same time, it narrows down what the HOA will focus on, which a lot of it has to do with uniformity of appearance. For example, color, specific design, and the area that it may cover. Protection includes, and that it's not limited to, the roofing systems, fixed or rolled down storm shutters, impact rated windows and doors, reinforced overhead and related style garage doors, among others. And the requirements would be published and available to all owners. Now, depending upon what classification, for example, an HOA may be, this may be that it has to have it as a PDF form, or if they are required to have a website, this must also be posted on their website to be available to all owners. Remember that this is not limited, which may include other items that are not covered under the slide. From a practical standpoint, you have to adopt the standard. And a lot of it is going to be focused on uniformity, a color scheme, that it has to be code compliant, and cost. This is one of the items that I remember there was a lot of conversation in it, was that HOAs cannot be so restrictive that the cost of protecting would be insurmountable for the typical homeowner. So, for example, I'm going to name some names, but let's say you can't say everybody has to have a Rollin electric operated shutter system, because that gets to be very expensive. So you have to be able to justify it from a uniformity standpoint, and also have some options for the homeowner. Now, typically, if you're in a high-rise condominium, the exterior is typically the HOA responsibility, not the individual owner. But if you have low-rise, then this would be very applicable. Aesthetics may be a factor, but they can be challenged if they are not reasonable. What does that mean? I don't really understand it, but I would say probably one area would be if you happen to have a color scheme on exterior painting, you're not going to take a typical light colored sand color, white, off-white, and allow a purple storm shutter to be put in. That may be a little bit out, and if challenged, you can basically overcome it. But if you require something, as we said, roller shutters, etc., that might be an issue. Questions on exterior responsibility. Here is where is it the condo association or the individual unit owner, and that should be sorted out first. Major impact on the older developments or those not required to be impact rated, but the unit owner wishes upgraded protection. This is going to be interesting if you have something that was built back in the 80s or 90s, and now people want to lower the cost and make it impact rated. Who pays for it? Vertical situation. You may have a 10-story condo that may be part of the assessment process. Maybe, maybe not. And if it is for the ownership, the better of the ownership, is it something that you split the cost? Those are going to be questions that probably will be answered based upon the individual owners as to what they elect to do. If the HOA has outbuildings or facilities, you're going to have to do a protection level analysis, and will be probably more than likely be part of your reserve study. And remember, that is outside the building department's overview, and this is just from a standpoint of information. Of course, costs are one of the things. Upgraded protection considerations. Is this also going to impact the reserves? And again, this is outside the building department, but it's something from a practical standpoint. People are going to ask building departments about this. You need to be aware that, yes, this does have an impact. No, it's not under the auspices of what the building department will be regulating. As I said, information only, and the enforcement of this particular requirement is by DBPR. It's by the state agency. It is not a local enforcement issue. So if you do get homeowners that come in and say, hey, so-and-so is being unreasonable because they want this, this, and this, well, ma'am, all we're doing is issuing the permit once you want to install this. However, the selection process, and that is something that you would have to file a complaint with the state agency to be resolved, and they go through that step. So be aware of it, and also have the resources to direct them as to who they should be directing their complaint to. Moving along on our next part here, We have the Interstate Mobility Act. This was something that was discussed extensively before as the bill worked its way through the process. It became effective on July the 1st, and the governor signed it on June the 28th. The concerns were, is one of the versions that was drifted around for a while was if you had a license in another state, you could just come over, get it by endorsement, and you could come in and practice in this state. And that would be all sorts of licenses. And of course, it would affect not only the building departments from that standpoint, but also architects, engineers, contractors, all the specialty trades. And of course, the architects and the engineers were among the first groups that said, no way, no how. We have this, and this requirement, so it got scaled back. As to being a little bit more detailed as to who, what, when, where, and why. It allows an applicant licensed in another state or territory, as defined, to apply for Florida licensing if they meet criteria evaluated by the applicable board, and if there is no board handling that particular category by the secretary. So what happens is if you are an architect or an engineer, and I'll use those two guys because it's fairly straightforward, is the architects would say, unless you pass the ARB and you're licensed in another state, then you have to take our ethics exam. Then, and if you have the proper experience, then you can come in and you can get it by endorsement. However, if you are in a state that does not require ARB, the architectural record exam, you are not going to get into the state of Florida as a license. You're going to go through several other hoops. Same thing if you're an engineer, architect record exam. The engineering profession has similar ones, so you're going to go through the same process. If there is no board, then it has to be based upon what has, in other words, you have to bring your curriculum vitae, all your licenses, all your experience, and then it's going to be on a case-by-case basis. You have to have been active in the category of your licensing for the past 3 or 4 years as of the date of the application. You also cannot have any disciplinary actions active, filed, or pending before your home board or state. And you have to attest that no disciplinary actions have been taken in a 5-year span prior to the application. So that narrows down some people that may be, shall we say, going from one jurisdiction to another because they've been dinged in their home jurisdiction and they want to go somewhere else where they're not under the purview of that particular board at home. If the professional category requires successful passing of a nationally recognized examination, the applicant must supply documentation verifying this. This is one of the items that was brought up by the architects and engineers, and is also applicable with regard to the profession of, for example, plans examiner, inspectors, etc. You must also supply information regarding your financial responsibility, background check as required for the professional license category. You also have to complete any applicable ethics or related verification exam as required under statute for the license category or board. And you also be required to show compliance with continuing education requirements. So for example, if you're an inspector and you're transferring and you're still pending, let's say about 10 continuing education units and you have not completed, that does not mean that you do get to get out of that requirement. They have to be completed. You have to show the compliance to that requirement. ICC qualifications in good standing for categories applied for would be applicable. If the state where the testing was not required, you would be required to show equivalency or take an approved test for qualification, including practicing for 5 years, and it would be by endorsement of the secretary. So there is a longer step if you got your license and your testing was not required, you have to go through more hoops to show equivalency, and you may be required to take the exam. The experience would have to be parallel to the requirements of the category that you have applied for licensing. And for most building departments, the requirements quite simply are ICC certification. Now, one of the items that I found interesting that was not addressed was, how about if you have somebody that has a current training program that they're involved with? Let's say you have an inspector that is doing a cross-training program to get another certification in a state outside the state of Florida. what happens to that particular investment in time and training that they've done outside of the state. There is no provision for transferring that out-of-state training program experience to a similar approved Florida program at this time. And believe it or not, we are now to the Q&A section. So I am going to ask Sergio and Stephanie if we have any questions. Oops, sorry about that. Got the wrong clicker. Sergio, Stephanie, have we got any? Oops, sorry about that, boys and girls.
Yeah, there were a few questions in the placed in the chat.
Oh, okay,
And
nothing in the Q&A?
There is one question in the QA that has to do, the question was, so 5 family, 4 stories, needs milestone inspection.
Yes.
The answer to that is 5 dwelling units, 3 stories or more would require a milestone inspection. So remember that milestone inspections start at the 3rd story and up.
Yeah, and I know that I forget who was the one that was fighting for that 4-family exemption on it, because we were talking about quads, and they said, well, you can have a quad that's 2-story or 3-story, and we don't want to have, that's not really a condominium or whatever. Okay, but that's correct. If it's 3 stories, more than three stories, you got to do it. 3 stories or more. So that, and let's see on the chat what we've got here. Sorry, guys, I was not looking at the chat. So let's see what we have. Celeste did post, for those of you that did not receive the handout on the slides, she did post that on the chat. So their link is there, just in case you did not see it. And
So the chat did have a question
on the TCO.
Well, on that, but the one I was going to read is
Okay.
that there was that if there was a restriction that it could not pass the slab inspection. And the bill does not identify any restriction to where the building must stop at. In essence, you're issuing a permit. The building can actually go all the way to completion. However, that means you cannot issue a final inspection or a CO until there is a final plat approved and recorded. And while the developer can sell the unit, they cannot transfer ownership until that final platting is in place.
So the key here, folks, is although you can have a temporary plat in order to be issuing these permits, which would give you a temporary ID number and an address, and they do allow them to go in and actually contract with a buyer with regards to the particular residence. There is no final closing until such time as you have the final plat that's recorded. Then you can issue your CO. Then everything else falls in place, i.e. now you can close on the contract. Now you have something to record, especially like a mortgage from a lender. So that is the key. Nothing else can happen until you have that final plat. And there's no such thing as a TCO in the building code. That's administrative. That's the answer on that one. Is there anything in 812 that would prevent the governing body from not allowing the first inspection on the issued permit until the final plat is recorded? That's a weird question. I think since you issued the permit, you have to allow the inspections to move on.
Yeah, that's correct. Again, the bill does not prevent the unit from being built. It is requiring that at least at this point, 50% of the units be permitted. And that means that construction can commence and can progress all the way to completion.
Right. So the only thing that's happening here is once you have the permit, it's allowing you to do the permit. So if you sign off on everything else, obviously you have to have flood and all that other good stuff also signed off on. So remember, that does not go around that requirement. So please, this is not the getting around anything else that may be required according to statute, other statutes that are applicable. Basically what it says is you can work on a preliminary plat. That's what it says. You can issue the permit, but until you get the final plat and it's recorded. You can't issue the CO. But meanwhile, everything else on the permit, such as the inspections, can go on. So nothing in the bill that will allow you to restrict inspections other than the typical NOC hold. Yeah. That and, you can't issue a CO until such time as you have a final plat. And that's correct. Sir, he'll answer that. Okay. Let's see. Gotta go down a little bit. Yeah, check with your attorney, because don't stick your neck out with regard to trying to restrict inspections, because the developer has vested interest and that could get you in hot water. I'm going to leave it at that. Have there been any discussions regarding other state licensing requirements that far exceed those of the ICC exams and their potential acceptance? The statute under the Interstate Mobility leaves that recognition to the board and the secretary. So the applicant would have to present evidence that what they did in another state who does not use ICC licensing, for example, as far as the exams, but the issue of a license with their exams, it's equivalent to or exceeds that requirement. So the onus is on them. It's not on the board nor the secretary to accept it just because the guy said. All right. You have to remember that part of it. Then there was a couple of things over here on the Q&A. Okay, Wendell asked about this section does not apply to single family, two family, or three family, or four family dwelling with three or fewer habitable floors above ground. The recertification does not apply to that. That's what the bill was cleaning out as far as that's concerned. And the other one. Okay, Eric, yeah, sir here answered you. Okay, sir here, you're talking about 50%, and I think Eric was talking about.
The townhomes?
Yeah, the townhomes, technically, like if you have row townhomes, like I had in South Florida, there were 7 two or 1 story townhouses. Those are not under the recertification, because unless there's.
No, I think that refers more to Senate Bill 812 and being able to issue 50% of the permits.
Yeah, it may be that, because I'm trying to say which one are you talking about?
Yeah, or maybe I misinterpreted. Maybe it is in relationship to recertification.
Yeah, but anyway, if the townhouses are not more than 3 stories, they're not in recertification, and the permitting thing under the temporary plat, that doesn't go there, so it'll be good. Would have been nice if they would have included the fire department for their fire availability at the site. Prior to the delivery of combustible materials to the job site. Let's ask the fire marshal about that. We're not going to answer for the fire marshal, but hopefully they do have fire protection available in case something does happen. And I would presume that there would be some sort of a temporary water service at that point. But again, that's above and beyond. They are required to have submitted all the information to the infrastructure, including water, utilities, power. And I would assume that there probably is temporary power and temporary water out there with regard to the developer being able to build. That's about all I've got. Is there anyone else? I'm going to go back to the chat here a sec. Gotta let the little guy open up so I can go look at the chat, see if anything else has been added. Nope. Nope. I don't see anything else. Does anybody have any other questions that they want to post in the chat? Well, if you can post them in the Q&A, it'd be great. Let's see. Somebody added the Florida Fire Prevention Code covers the site requirements for access and hiding. That is correct, Mr. Allen. And we would assume that if you have your temporary plat, especially under the legislation, that the poor utility guys are going to have to get out there with some temporary power and some water hookups to be able to cover the area, especially sanitary and everything else that needs to happen typically at a job site. And Sergio, anything else that you want to add?
I
That
don't
came
see
to mind?
anything else. I think we kind of covered it all.
I think we probably covered a bunch of it. I'm trying to think of anything else. Stephanie, you have something else that you want to add that you thought about after the fact?
Nope, everything is good on my end.
Okay. Well, I'm going to leave this open for a couple of more minutes before we close, for the simple reason that it gives everybody a time to reflect if they have any other questions. I do know that one of the issues that I expect will be part of the upcoming session, unfortunately, we'll have to deal with the recertification process, but will have absolutely nothing to do with us. I believe this is going to be with regards to the reserve structural analysis part of it. So the only thing I can tell you is that stay tuned as far as that's concerned. We are keeping an eye on it with regards to, is there something that's going to come in and have impact on the building departments? However, I think I've expressed this a whole bunch of times, even though it does not impact building departments, you do need to make your frontline people aware of what's going on, for the simple reason that you're going to have one of your local citizens come in and be confused and think the building department is handling it. You need to educate them so that they can also pass on the proper information to these poor citizens and get confused. And I know with the whole bit now with the HOA protection requirements and the reports on, there's going to be reports with regards not only to phase 1, phase 2 recertification that the condominium 718, 719 have to supply to all the owners. And if they're big enough, they have to put it on their website, but also regards to the reserve studies. So you are going to have lots of fun with regards to that. Comment from Reynaldo about expecting an extension since there will be a crunch to find an engineer architect. That was discussed, believe it or not, over a year ago. That was brought up, and that is why they actually gave an extra year. So a lot of those now on the notifications, I don't know how it affected Dade and Broward County, but I know that it affected other jurisdictions. They actually had to the end of this year to notify the applicable condominiums under 718 or 719 that they had to do their phase 1 study, and that gave them the allotted time frame with regards to the period of time that they have to go ahead and go through the process of securing the professional and getting that done. Do I think they're going to extend it for another year? I highly doubt it. But then again, hey, it's a legislature. They may think differently than I, and I am not a legislator, and I'm not an attorney, and I don't play one or profess to be one. I just think that they've given them the time, and I think that there's always going to be everybody that is complaining that they don't have enough time. However, I believe that there's something else in the offing, and we will have that conversation in a future date, not here and now.
Hey, Ron,
Yes, sir.
I can add a little bit of information on
Yes, go ahead.
around the topic of milestone inspection, and
Yes.
here in Miami-Dade, I've read a couple of news articles where in the real estate market there are over 19,000 condo units up for sale because of what's happening with the milestone inspection. And I want to remind the group that those buildings that were built 1990 have their CO at 1993. Those are due by the end of this year. And the legislator last year did extend those that are built in 1994 until next year by the end of 2025. However,
Mhm.
understand that the SIRS or the structural integrity reserve study is actually due for all condominiums by the end of this year.
Mhm.
And that's the one that's driving the special assessments because they
Yes.
have to budget, and their budget has to include replacements of those items that have a shortened lifespan. So that's what a lot of the market is seeing, that with these assessments that are being so outrageous, that a lot of the condo unit owners are not able to afford that. So that's kind of, they're off selling these condo units. So, you can expect that building departments are probably going to start seeing a lot of repair permits for all these replacement of any type of equipment that needs to be replaced, whether it's a re-roof or mechanical or electrical systems that have to be replaced because they're in age and they have hit this study as something that needs to be as something that needs to be repaired. And of course, the actual study itself is costly. So that's something that all condo units have to bear equal cost in. So know about that, and know that you're bound to see some of this activity hit your building department soon in the form of permits, hopefully. And as this gets enacted later this year.
Yeah, and remember, as I mentioned earlier, but I'll repeat it again, the structural reserve study, which has nothing to do with building department, has to be delivered to each owner, whether they send them the form, they send them the PDF, or they post it on the condo's website. These are not recorded and are not filed with the building department. However, we'll be asked about them. And I know Sergio's probably had at least one or two people wondering, what the heck is this? And what does the building department have to do with it? Because I heard from somebody about that and they said, what are they talking about? I said, has nothing to do with you, but here's what it is. So yes, and that is going to impact the real estate market, and which is no surprise because I hate to say it, down in your neck of the woods, Sergio, when I lived down there, there was more than one condo association that was more of the aesthetics versus the back of the house maintenance oriented. So it's not going to be surprising that there probably will be some condos that have multi-million-dollar shortages on what is recommended, and which means special assessments. Stay tuned for that one. Other than that, the only other item that I am thinking about, and that doesn't have anything to do with any of these, has absolutely nothing else. Anyway, one announcement with regards to the legislative committee. If you are a member of the legislative committee, you will be getting an update email in the next 2 weeks with regards to a briefing, date and time, etc. on it. If you are interested and are a member of BOAF and wish to participate with the legislative committee or the code development committee, because I also promote for them, please go to the BOAF website and apply to become a member of the committee. It's still open, and we are happy to take more members as far as that's concerned. Other than that, let me go to, sorry, hold on. I think it's picky about that. Closing items. You have the handout. It is a PDF. And again, if you supplied all your information with regards to your licensing, etc., this will be submitted for ICC education credit. If you forgot, go back and correct it or email BOAF. If you have any questions that you think about after we hang up here and you say, oh, I forgot to ask that, you can email us. Here is the link. It is on the PDF of the slides, and that will get to us. We'll be happy to answer it as soon as we can. I want to thank you for attending on behalf of the Building Officials Association of Florida, on behalf of Sergio and Stephanie, our two vice chairs, Ann Russo, our executive director, Celeste Roman, our workhorse person here who does a fantastic job, all the people who have contributed comments and suggestions, and myself. Thank you very much for attending, and you all have a great day. And again, if you have any questions, please email us at the link. Thank you very much, and have a great day.
Bye, everyone.
Take care. Have a good one, folks.